Final Fantasy games used to always review extremely well, and when I say well, they would always break a 90 aggregated score. During the so-called golden era of Final Fantasy, the series was seen as untouchable, with every game receiving universal praise from critics, even if those games would fall into divisive territory with fans. Of course, as time would go along, this would no longer be the case for Final Fantasy, with Final Fantasy XIII at the time of its release receiving the lowest aggregated score that the series had up to that point, with the PS3 version sitting at an 83. Final Fantasy XV would then receive a new record low at 81. Now, 81 and 83 aren't terrible scores, but bear in mind this is a 10-point drop-off from the average the series was doing in the years prior. Final Fantasy XVI went much further by scoring an 87 on its aggregate score, although none of these games could break the aggregate score of Final Fantasy XIV's Shadowbringers and Endwalker. These games were able to push through the 90s ceiling. However, as far as single-player Final Fantasies go, none of them have been able to crack the 90s ceiling since Final Fantasy XII. And that was 18, almost 20 years ago, which, holy crap, does that make me feel old. But it has been that long since we've seen a Final Fantasy game review that high. And I am pleased to say, boys, we are so back right now. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has broken the ceiling for Final Fantasy game reviews. My initial prediction for this game was to score a 92 on Metacritic, and it may fluctuate down to a 92, but currently, as of the recording of this video, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is sitting at a 93. This isn't just a high score, this has huge historic precedence within the Final Fantasy series. For starters, this is arguably the highest score that a Final Fantasy game has ever received. Now, yes, technically Final Fantasy IX is sitting at a 94 on Metacritic, and that's just with 26 reviewers. This has over 100 reviewers. For me personally, I think that the number of reviewers has to be factored in. As such, the fact that over 100 people have professionally played this game and evaluated it and found it to be this good makes it arguably the most praised Final Fantasy game to ever release. That is absolutely nutty. It's just so incredible that we're here. I thought that Final Fantasy XVI would be the one to do it, but the more and more that we saw of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, the more we saw of the open world, the mini games, the things that they had planned for this game, I was like, you know what? I really think that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is going to be the game that really brings Final Fantasy back in a massive way, where it's an absolute serious contender for Game of the Year. And I think that's exactly what we're looking at when we see Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Game of the Year. Thus far, it is the highest rated Game of the Year. And even though there's only 2 months in this year so far, this is 2024, the hit sequel to 2023, with so many games stuffed right into this corner. There's been a lot of fantastic games, so for this game to place this high, this is something truly special. As highly respected as the Final Fantasy series is, they've never really officially won a Game of the Year award at any of the highly accredited ceremonies, in part because the Golden Era titles came out when there wasn't really a Game of the Year award ceremony like there is now, and it wasn't something officialized like it is now. And while games like Final Fantasy XIII, XV, and XVI are widely loved by many, the games were also flawed in other ways that would prevent them from actually clutching a Game of the Year award in face of very stiff competition. Final Fantasy VII Remake is probably the closest they've ever came. However, that lost out to The Last of Us Part 2. But this game and what this game is doing, there is a legitimate chance here for the first time in the 35+ year history of Final Fantasy for a game from this series to win Game of the Year. That must be super exciting for everyone at Square Enix, and it would be a huge dub for the community and everyone who supported the game thus far. Listen, I'm not going to get ahead of myself. This is still an early year and a very competitive year. It's still entirely possible for this game to lose it, but right now the hype is in our favor, and it seems like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth might actually be the game to take it. And with that being said, here is what some of the critics have had to say about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. GamesBeat saying, "I love Final Fantasy VII Remake, but Rebirth makes it look like a demo." And indeed, that's a sentiment that is felt throughout many of the reviews. People are saying that Final Fantasy VII Remake looks almost like a beta test compared to Rebirth. GameSpew mentioned the same thing, with them saying, "We absolutely loved Final Fantasy VII Remake, but it's safe to say that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth surpasses it in every way possible. It's a masterpiece. It tells a grander tale with more twists and turns that keep you on your feet. And while some new story elements may rub some players up the wrong way, they keep things feeling fresh and make us keen to see where Square Enix will take things next." Ultimately, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has exceeded our expectations, building on the original game, and indeed Final Fantasy VII Remake, delivering a sequel that feels bigger and better in all regards. My boy Gene from the Washington Post had this to say, "Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is so good, it nearly wrecked my life." Gene, if you're watching, I can't wait for it to wreck my life too. Now the game does have some 8 reviews on the lower end, and here is what some of those more critical reviewers had to say about Rebirth. GameSpot highlighted in their The Bad section that, quote, "The ending doesn't work and is a mess. Forced minigames disrupt the pacing." As far as these things go, I've been long since prepared for something like this. This multiversal direction is bound to be pretty contentious with a lot of people. However, from what I can see of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, everything else that it does as a Final Fantasy game, its characters, its battle system, its music, its character moments and arcs, are so strong that maybe you can forgive some of the more divisive elements that are going to happen later in the game. It's something I spent the last 4 years preparing for, and through various streams and talks with other creators, have long since come to terms with. For those that are still holding on to Copium, this might be a bit of an issue though. With this all being said, the game's creative director Tetsuya Nomura has taken to the Final Fantasy VII Twitter to share this note. "The launch of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is nearly here, with only 7 days to go. Our live streaming and content sharing guidelines have already been announced. But please allow me to communicate this important request again. In posting anything that strongly relates to the game's story on social media and video sharing sites, I ask that you please make sure to include spoiler warnings so as not to affect the experience of those who have yet to play the game. I would also be grateful if you could refrain from using any scenes from those vital parts of the story in your video thumbnails. We deliberately did not restrict the record and share functions for any area in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, as we want you to be able to share and comment on your gameplay experiences. Still, I am making this request to ask for the respect toward all players out there who want to avoid spoilers until they have personally completed the story. Full details of the sharing guidelines and other points of caution can be found at the URL in this post. I ask for your understanding and cooperation so that everyone who has waited so long for this day can enjoy Final Fantasy VII Rebirth to the fullest." And indeed, people have been waiting so long for this game. So everyone, please do your best to be respectful of everyone who has been waiting almost 4 years for this game to come out, and all the people who have been with the project for almost 10 years now, with it being announced in 2015, and all the speculation that came years before that. When you look at the big picture here, Final Fantasy is so back right now. This is a tremendous win, and with this being the first game that Hamaguchi has ever fully directed himself, my desire to see him make his own Final Fantasy game from scratch, maybe have him make his own Final Fantasy 17 or 18, has increased tremendously. Hamaguchi seems to really know what he's doing. From all the interviews with him, he would always say the exact right thing that would make me go, "This guy understands exactly what needs to be done." And currently, I think he is one of the future leaders of the Final Fantasy series going forward. I cannot wait to see what he works on next, aside from Remake Part 3. This all being said, it feels like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is CB1's magnum opus. And the good news is, you won't be waiting much longer until you can get your hands on this incredible Final Fantasy title. And with that, please smack that subscribe button, hit the bell icon too, and I will see you all in the next video.